4 billion years ago, Earth was completely dead. It wasn't quiet. It was violent. Massive volcanoes erupted non-stop. Meteorites crashed into the surface. The oceans boiled. The air was filled with toxic gases. And lightning constantly struck the surface. This was not a place built for life. It was a place that destroyed anything that tried to last. But that's where life started. And that might be the most surprising thing in the entire universe. In this chaos, there were no cells, no plants, no animals, not even bacteria, just chemistry. Billions of molecules floating, crashing, reacting, breaking apart. Non-stop. But in all that chaos, something unusual happened. Some molecules didn't just break apart, they connected. They formed long chains. Some of those chains twisted into shapes that were stable. Some of those shapes could even copy themselves. That changed everything. Because now, there were molecules that could make more of themselves. They weren't alive. Not yet. But they had one very important feature: they could repeat. And if something can repeat, it can compete. Here's the key idea. Life didn't start with a cell or a brain or a heartbeat. It started with a loop, a repeating chemical reaction that could continue itself. And the better it copied, the longer it lasted. Some versions were sloppy and fell apart. Others held together longer. The ones that lasted spread. And just like that, nature started playing favorites, not consciously, not with intent, just through physics and time. The molecules that could survive did. The ones that couldn't disappeared. That's evolution. Before DNA, before biology, just molecules competing to stay. But here's the big leap. Some of these repeating molecules ended up inside small bubbles, tiny blobs of fat that form naturally in water. These bubbles worked like little containers. They kept the useful molecules inside, and the rest of the world outside. That doesn't sound like much, but it's one of the most important moments in history. Because now, there was a boundary. An inside and an outside. A space that could protect what worked and reject what didn't. That's the beginning of the first cell. It still wasn't alive in the way we think of life. But it had 3 key things: a way to hold itself together, a way to store information, a way to change and pass on that change. From there, it was only a matter of time. Life didn't explode into existence. It built itself, step by step, from chemistry that stuck around. There was no plan, no goal, just chance, filtered by time. But once a system could copy itself, hold itself together, and slowly improve through tiny changes, it had already crossed the line. It wasn't just matter anymore. It was life in its earliest, simplest form. And that's what you are too, a direct descendant of a molecule that refused to stop. The code that could copy itself. Let's say you're one of those early molecules, the kind that can make a copy of yourself. You float around in the ocean, you find the right ingredients, and you build another version of you. That's great, until something changes. Maybe the environment shifts. Maybe there's a new chemical in the mix. Suddenly, your old structure doesn't work so well. You need to adapt. But how? This is where one of the most important molecules in history appears. Its name is DNA. And its secret power isn't what it does. It's what it stores. DNA is a molecule that can carry instructions. Not just for building itself, but for building everything else a living cell needs. Think of it like this. Imagine a string of letters A, T, C, and G. Those 4 letters are the alphabet of DNA. They can be arranged in almost endless combinations, and each sequence means something different. One sequence might tell a cell how to build a protein. Another might tell it when to divide. Another might do nothing at all. Just leftover noise from a billion years of trial and error. But together, these sequences form a code, a physical language written in chemistry. Now here's the real breakthrough. DNA doesn't just store these instructions, it can copy them. Over and over, generation after generation, cells pass this code down. From 1 cell to 2. From 2 to 4. From single-celled organisms to plants, animals, humans. And it's not just copying, it's copying with variation. Sometimes a tiny mistake gets introduced, a single letter flipped. This is a mutation. And most of the time, it does nothing, or it breaks something. But once in a while, a mutation does something new. It helps the cell survive a little better, or faster, or longer. And that tiny change, that single letter typo, gets passed on. That's evolution by natural selection. And DNA is what makes it possible. Here's why this matters. Before DNA, life was limited to whatever molecules happened to exist. After DNA, life could remember what worked, experiment with changes, and build on success. It wasn't just reacting anymore, it was learning. Not consciously, not with thoughts, but with chemistry. A molecule that could copy its instructions and pass those instructions forward was no longer just part of the environment. It had become a system that could evolve. Now let's zoom out. Every cell in your body, every hair, every muscle, every neuron carries a full copy of your DNA. The same four-letter code, written billions of times. That code tells your cells how to build you, how tall you might grow, how your brain is wired, what color your eyes are, even how likely you are to love the taste of coffee. And none of this was designed from scratch. It's the result of billions of years of edits. Passed down, rewritten, improved, broken, reassembled from the first self-copying molecule to you. That's the real story of DNA. It's not perfect, it's not clean, but it works. It stores what survived, it forgets what failed, and it keeps trying again. Every living thing you've ever seen, a bird, a mushroom, a person, is built from a slightly different version of the same system. A molecule that started as a fluke, but became the world's most successful memory. And now, here's the question. Once life had memory, what would it do with it? Because memory leads to something else. It leads to competition. And once life can copy itself and evolve, it starts looking for one thing above all: energy. And that's where the real struggle begins. The war for energy. By now, early life had a few powerful tricks. It could store information, it could copy itself, it could survive inside tiny protective bubbles, the first cells. But there was still one problem. Staying alive takes energy. And energy doesn't come for free. Every time a molecule copied itself, it needed raw material. Every time a cell repaired itself, it needed fuel. Every time anything changed, it had to break the laws of decay, at least temporarily. And to do that, life had to find a way to steal order from chaos. This is where the real game begins, because the cell that couldn't power itself died, and the cell that could, it took over. At first it was simple. Some cells absorbed chemicals floating nearby. If they were lucky, those chemicals reacted in a way that released energy, enough to keep the cell running, enough to copy again. But randomness isn't reliable. So over time, cells got smarter. Chemically, not consciously. They built tools inside themselves, enzymes, to break food down more efficiently. They created pathways to move energy around. And most importantly, they found ways to store it. The real breakthrough came with something called ATP. You can think of it as a tiny biological battery. When a cell breaks down food, it stores the released energy in ATP, a molecule designed to carry energy wherever it's needed. Need to move something? Use ATP. Need to build something? ATP. Need to divide? You get the idea. Every living thing today, from a tree to a human to a single bacterium, relies on ATP. It's one of the most important molecules in life. And it's older than every species that exists now. But energy wasn't always easy to get. Some environments had little food. Some had no light. Others were poisoned with chemicals. So cells adapted in different ways. Some became fermenters, breaking down sugars without oxygen. Others became chemosynthesizers, feeding off minerals and gases from deep-sea vents. Some figured out how to use light, inventing photosynthesis. That changed everything, because now life didn't have to find energy. It could create it. The first photosynthetic cells captured sunlight and used it to turn carbon dioxide and water into sugar. Sugar became fuel. Fuel meant survival. But there was a side effect. This process released something new into the environment: oxygen. At first, it wasn't a good thing. In fact, for most life on Earth, oxygen was toxic. It damaged cells. It interfered with chemical reactions. It killed off huge numbers of early organisms. This is called the Great Oxygen Catastrophe. It sounds dramatic, because it was. For the first time, life itself had changed the planet in a way that almost destroyed it. But not all cells died. Some adapted, and a few of them, a very special few, learned how to use oxygen instead of fear it. This was another leap. Because oxygen turned out to be the most powerful energy source life had ever found. It allowed cells to extract much more energy from food, which meant they could grow faster, live longer, and evolve more complex systems. Eventually, one of those oxygen-using cells got absorbed by another cell. But instead of being digested, it stayed. It worked together. That partnership became what we now call a mitochondrion, the powerhouse of the cell. Almost every complex organism alive today, including you, runs on mitochondria. Tiny ancient life forms, still inside you, turning food and oxygen into the energy you need to move, think, and survive. So what does this all mean? It means that life didn't just evolve by copying. It evolved by feeding, by finding better and better ways to power the pattern. And that search for energy created almost everything else. It led to photosynthesis, which created oxygen, which made breathing possible, which led to mitochondria, which made complex life possible, which led to animals, which led to you. All of it, from the cell to the brain, was built on one simple rule: keep the pattern alive, whatever it takes. In the beginning, life was just copying molecules. Now, it was starting to fight for survival. And that fight was only going to get more intense, because once cells learned to feed, they learned to compete. And that's when nature began to choose winners. The Great Oxygen Catastrophe. By now, life was everywhere. Not in the way we know it today: no animals, no trees, no jellyfish, but the oceans were full of single-celled organisms, thriving in their own microscopic world. They figured out how to survive, how to feed, how to copy their code and pass it on. But in doing so, they also created a problem, a massive one. Some of these early cells had evolved a new way to get energy: photosynthesis. They could use sunlight to turn water and carbon dioxide into food. It was brilliant, efficient, unlimited. There was just one catch. As a byproduct, they released oxygen. At first, it wasn't a big deal. Oxygen was just another gas, something that floated off into the atmosphere. But over time, it built up. And that changed everything. To us, oxygen means life. To most early life, it meant death. Because oxygen is highly reactive. It tears apart molecules. It damages cells. It breaks down the very chemistry that early organisms depended on. This was the worst environmental disaster life had ever caused, and it was caused by life itself. It's called the Great Oxygen Catastrophe, and it happened about 2.4 billion years ago. As oxygen levels rose, entire ecosystems collapsed. Species that had been thriving for millions of years suddenly faced a new reality. The world had changed, and they weren't adapted to it. Many of them went extinct. Some tried to retreat underground. Others adapted slowly, painfully, to survive the new toxic atmosphere. But something strange happened in the middle of all this destruction. A few organisms didn't just tolerate oxygen. They learned to use it. This was a game changer. Because oxygen, as dangerous as it was also incredibly powerful. It allowed cells to extract much more energy from food than ever before. That meant they could grow faster, repair damage better, and eventually evolve into something more complex. But how? It all came down to a strange twist of fate. At some point, a small oxygen-using cell was absorbed by a larger one. Normally, that would be the end of the small cell, digested and recycled for parts. But this time, something different happened. The small cell didn't die. It kept living inside the bigger one. It kept processing oxygen, producing energy, and helping its host survive. Over time, this relationship became permanent. The two cells became one. That tiny oxygen processor is still inside you. It's inside every animal, every plant, every human. We call it the mitochondrion. It's not just part of the cell. It is a former cell, a remnant of an ancient symbiosis. This was one of the most important events in the history of life. A merger, a partnership, an evolutionary deal that changed everything. Because now, life had serious power. This is how the stage was set for the rise of complex organisms. With oxygen, life could build bigger bodies. With mitochondria, it could fuel more activity. And with photosynthesis still pumping out oxygen, the atmosphere became richer and richer, ready for the next leap. But this whole transformation came from a twist of evolutionary irony. Life accidentally made a gas that nearly killed the planet, and in doing so unlocked the energy that would eventually let it walk on land. That's the story of evolution. It's not clean. It's not safe. It's full of dead ends, disasters, and lucky recoveries. But through all of it, one rule never changes. What survives shapes the future. And now, with more energy than ever before, cells were about to make one more leap. They were about to team up. The first mergers. For billions of years, life on Earth was single-celled. Tiny organisms, each just one cell, floated through the oceans, absorbing nutrients, copying themselves, and adapting slowly to change. But something was missing. No matter how efficient they became, they were stuck. Each one could only do so much, only grow so large, only handle so many tasks at once. And that limitation hit a wall, until something happened that changed the shape of life forever. A few cells found a new survival strategy. Instead of doing everything alone, they began doing different things, together. One cell would take in nutrients. Another would focus on reproduction. A third might manage waste. But they weren't separate anymore. They were stuck together, living as a single unit. That might not sound revolutionary, but it was. Because this was the beginning of multicellularity. Life made not from one cell, but from many, working as one. It didn't happen all at once. At first, cells just clumped together loosely, colonies, not organisms. But over time, the partnerships became more specialized. Some cells gave up the ability to reproduce. Some became the outer layer. Some became feeders, movers, sensors. And eventually, the whole group began dividing labor so well that no single cell could survive on its own anymore. They weren't a colony. They were a body. Think about what that means. For the first time, life wasn't just a thing that copies itself. It was a system of cells, with different roles, different shapes, working together to survive, grow, and adapt. But there was a cost. For this to work, most cells had to give up their independence. They had to die when told. Stay where placed, specialize, and never change back. But in exchange, they became something bigger. Something no single cell could ever become. You are living proof of this system. Your body has trillions of cells, and almost none of them are thinking about you. They don't know what you are. They don't even know they're part of a human. They just follow instructions. Muscle cells contract. Skin cells protect. Blood cells transport. Brain cells send signals, each one doing its job so the pattern you can survive. This is what complexity really is, cooperation with sacrifice. A system made of smaller pieces that give up freedom to keep the whole thing alive. And here's the incredible part. Every complex living thing on Earth, every worm, bird, tree, whale, or person is built on this same idea. We all came from single-celled ancestors. And we all survived because our cells learned to work together. But how do they cooperate? How do trillions of cells know what to do, when to grow, when to stop, when to die? The answer lies in control, in systems of regulation, in communication. And that's what sets the stage for the next act. Because once cells could specialize, they started building tissues. And tissues became organs. And organs eventually led to something that changed the game again, a system that could feel, a system that could think, a nervous system. That's where we go next. Because now, life doesn't just survive. It doesn't just compete. It responds. It senses. It learns. The story of biology is about to develop a mind. The Game of Mutation. Here's something strange. Life by itself doesn't try to improve. It just tries to continue. And the thing that keeps it changing, the reason you aren't a bacterium floating in the sea, is because every time life copies itself, it makes mistakes. We call those mistakes mutations, and they're not rare. They happen constantly, in every cell, every second, in every living thing. But what makes them powerful is not the fact that they happen, it's what happens next. Think about this. Your DNA is made up of billions of chemical letters. Each time a cell copies it, it's like duplicating an encyclopedia by hand. Sometimes, a single letter gets swapped, or a line gets deleted, or repeated, or flipped. Most of the time, nothing happens. Sometimes, it breaks something. The cell dies. The organism never develops. The mutation ends there. But once in a while, a change makes the organism a little faster, a little stronger, a little better at surviving. And that change gets passed on. This is evolution, not improvement. Just difference, filtered by survival. No one plans it. No one designs it. There is no direction, no finish line, no goal. Just variation, passed to the next generation, competing to stay. Every trait you have, your eyes, your heartbeat, your immune system, was built from mistakes that worked. And every species that ever lived was shaped by accidents that didn't kill it. But mutation alone isn't enough. You also need selection, a world that forces change to matter. Imagine a random mutation gives a rabbit slightly longer legs. If the world doesn't care, if there are no predators, no challenges, the trait doesn't spread. But if faster rabbits survive, that one small mutation becomes everything. In a few generations, all the rabbits are faster. Not because they wanted to be, but because the slow ones aren't there anymore. This is natural selection. A constant, automatic process that edits life without meaning to. It's slow. It's cruel. It's efficient. And it never, ever stops. It's not about the strongest. It's about what fits the environment right now. And when the environment changes, the rules change. Winners become losers. Extinct species make room for new experiments. That's why evolution never ends, because the world never stops changing. Now here's something even more fascinating. Sometimes, evolution doesn't just change a trait, it changes the rules of evolution itself. Organisms evolve to mutate more, or to swap genes with others, or to copy entire chunks of their DNA and reshuffle them. Some bacteria can literally absorb DNA from dead neighbors, mixing and matching new traits, like hacking their own genetics. And viruses? They don't even care about species boundaries. They jump between hosts, recombining genetic material, speeding up evolution across the entire tree of life. So when you picture evolution, don't imagine a slow, smooth path. Imagine a storm of variation, most of it useless or deadly, but some of it lucky, and a tiny fraction of it revolutionary. Like a random mutation in a lizard's skin that leads to feathers, or a shift in a fish's fins that turns into legs, or a wiring change in a primate's brain that leads to language. These were all mutations. They weren't planned, but they survived. And because they survived, they became us. So what does this mean for you? It means you are the result of 4 billion years of errors that happened to work out. You're not perfectly designed. You're barely held together. You're full of leftover parts, evolutionary hacks, and weird solutions. But that's the beauty of it. Evolution isn't about perfection. It's about possibility. And when life is allowed to keep mutating, keep testing, keep surviving, it builds things that no plan could ever imagine. When nature gets creative, if evolution had a motto, it wouldn't be, design the best solution. It would be, use what's already there. And that changes everything. Because evolution doesn't plan. It doesn't imagine a perfect wing or eye or limb and then build it. It just takes what's lying around, adds a mutation, and asks, does this still work? If the answer is yes, Even barely, it stays. That's why life is full of strange compromises. You'd think, for example, that the human eye is a masterpiece. It can focus, adjust to light, detect color, all automatically. But inside the eye, the wiring is backwards. Literally, your photoreceptors, the cells that detect light, are buried beneath layers of nerves and blood vessels. Light has to pass through all that clutter before it reaches them. Why? Because evolution didn't design the eye from scratch. It just adapted what it had. And what it had already had that structure, so it kept it. The result? It works. But it's not elegant. It's a duct tape solution that got the job done well enough to pass on. And it's not just you. Look at a giraffe. There's a nerve that runs from its brain down its neck, loops around an artery near the heart, and then comes all the way back up to the throat. Why? Because in fish, where this nerve arrangement evolved, the heart and throat were close together. But as necks got longer, the nerve just stretched, instead of rerouting. Millions of years later, you get a looping detour that makes no sense at all, but still works. Evolution can't start over. Once a structure works, even a little, it gets built upon, not replaced. That's why you see wings made from arms, eyes made from skin, lungs that started as swim bladders. That's also why you have a tailbone, even though you don't have a tail. And wisdom teeth, even though your jaw doesn't have room. And an appendix that used to digest leaves, but now mostly waits to get inflamed. These are not design flaws. They're evolutionary leftovers, reminders that your body was not made for you. It was inherited. Sometimes these leftovers are harmless. Sometimes they're fatal. The nerves in your back, for example, evolved when our ancestors walked on all fours. Then we stood up. And now many of us have chronic pain, herniated discs, and curved spines. Evolution doesn't care if you survive long enough to reproduce. You've done your job, back pain or not. That's the brutal truth. Nature doesn't optimize for comfort. It only optimizes for survival. But here's what makes evolution fascinating. Even with all this hacking, copying, and reusing, life doesn't just get by. It creates. Feathers evolved from reptile scales. Mammal ears evolved from jawbones, the jaw itself. Repurposed gill supports from ancient fish. The most complex systems in your body were built from parts meant to do something completely different. And yet, they work. Think about flight. Birds, bats, insects, and even flying squirrels all evolved flight, but none of them did it the same way. They all started with different bodies, different limbs, different tools, and they all figured out a way to lift off, not because flight was destined, but because their mutations gave them a slight edge. Gliding from trees, catching prey, escaping predators. Flight wasn't invented. It emerged through thousands of lucky steps built on completely unrelated structures. This is what makes life so strange and beautiful. Evolution doesn't write blueprints. It repurposes history. That's why every living thing is both a success and a museum. You carry the evidence of millions of lives before you, not just in your DNA, but in your organs, your reflexes, your instincts. You are not a perfect machine. You are a modified survivor. And the path that got you here was full of detours, shortcuts, and strange solutions that barely worked. But they were good enough to keep going. And because they kept going, you exist. The explosion of forms. For nearly 3 billion years, life stayed simple. One cell, maybe two, floating, feeding, dividing. Occasionally they teamed up, forming simple multicellular blobs. But overall, Earth was quiet, microscopic, invisible. Then suddenly, about 540 million years ago, everything changed. In the span of just 20 to 30 million years, a blink in deep time, life went from soft, simple creatures to an explosion of complex animals. Claws, teeth, legs, brains, eyes, armor, speed. It all showed up fast. This is called the Cambrian explosion, and it's one of the most mysterious events in biology. Because for reasons we still don't fully understand, evolution hit the gas pedal. Before the Cambrian, most organisms were small, soft-bodied, and slow. After the Cambrian, the oceans were full of predators and prey. Animals began moving with purpose. They began seeing. They began hunting. For the first time, life wasn't just copying itself, it was now in a race. So what triggered this explosion? Scientists don't know for sure, but they have ideas. One theory is oxygen. Remember the photosynthesis revolution? It had slowly filled the atmosphere with breathable oxygen, and now for the first time there was enough of it to support high-energy activity, like muscles, nerves, and movement. Another theory is genetics. By this point, organisms had developed powerful genetic toolkits like Hox genes which control body plans. These genes don't just build one structure, they build entire sections of the body, limbs, heads, tails. Once this system was in place, it allowed for huge variation with just a few mutations. The result? A massive leap in biological creativity. But maybe the simplest answer is arms races. Imagine this. Some creature evolves a small spike. It's harder to eat, so predators evolve better tools, teeth, claws, speed, which forces prey to evolve better defenses, shells, eyes, camouflage. This feedback loop, competition driving innovation, can speed up evolution dramatically. And that may be exactly what happened. Fossils from this period show a bizarre cast of creatures, some with 5 eyes, some with armored heads and swimming tails, some with no obvious purpose or symmetry at all. Many of these lineages vanished, but others became the ancestors of all modern animals. Worms, insects, sponges, arthropods, fish. The basic blueprints for every animal body you know today, including your own, were created during the Cambrian explosion. And they've barely changed since. Here's what that means. Your body, with its head, spine, limbs, symmetry, organs, was shaped during this wild period of experimentation. And once these body plans were established, they became the frameworks that evolution would continue to modify for the next 500 million years. Bird wings? Modified arms. Whale flippers? Modified legs. Octopus tentacles? Modified mollusk feet. Evolution didn't need to invent new blueprints. It just kept tweaking the old ones. Because the explosion had already written the core designs. But here's the twist. We don't know why it happened then. We don't know why life spent billions of years as single cells, only to suddenly explode in complexity. The environment didn't shift that dramatically. The oxygen rise wasn't that sudden. The genes were likely there for a while. And yet, something unlocked. Some threshold was crossed, and biology took off. Maybe it's just how evolution works. Slow build-up, long silence, then a breaking point, and rapid change. But whatever the reason, the Cambrian explosion marks the moment when life truly took over. Not just surviving, but shaping the oceans, filling every niche, outcompeting every other force on Earth. From that point on, the biosphere wasn't just passive, it was a force of nature. And the next big leap was already forming. Because now that life could move, fight, see, and hunt, what would happen if it started to sense? Not just react, but feel, perceive, decide. The answer was a nervous system. The rise of nerves. Movement changes everything. Before, life drifted. Cells floated wherever the water took them. Reactions happened, but only when something touched them. But now, there were muscles, limbs, eyes, jaws. And suddenly it mattered what direction you moved, when you moved, what you were moving toward. But to move intentionally, you need more than a body. You need a signal, a system that can sense the outside world and decide how to react. This is how nervous systems were born. It started simple. Some cells developed sensitivity. They could detect light, pressure, temperature, chemicals. Others developed the ability to send signals, little electrical pulses from one part of the body to another. The first nervous systems were nothing like brains. They were more like networks. A few connected lines of communication, passing messages across a simple animal. Touch the edge, right pointing arrow contract. Sense light, right pointing arrow move toward it. Smell a molecule, right pointing arrow swim closer. Even jellyfish have this. They don't think, but they can feel and respond. And that changed the game, because once life could sense the environment, it could start making choices. Not conscious choices, but biological decisions. Go left or right. Swim up or down. Chase or flee. Each decision was still automatic. But now it could be shaped by the world. And that meant creatures with slightly better reactions, slightly faster nerves, more accurate sensors, more useful reflexes, had a better shot at survival. So natural selection didn't just favor stronger animals. It began to favor smarter wiring. Over millions of years, these simple networks got more complex. Instead of just reacting, some organisms began to coordinate their movements. Their sensors got sharper. Their muscles got more precise. And inside their bodies, something new began to form. A central hub. A cluster of nerve cells, designed to process information. A primitive brain. Still simple. Still limited, but enough to filter signals, prioritize actions, and respond more flexibly than ever before. This was the beginning of neural processing, not thought, not memory, just the ability to weigh different inputs and choose the best output. Should I chase that shadow? Should I hide from that vibration? Should I move toward warmth or food? The nervous system didn't just help animals survive, it helped them predict. And when you can predict the future, even by 1 second, you gain an edge over everything that can't. Evolution ran with it. Nervous systems expanded. Sensory organs evolved. Specialized cells emerged, neurons, synapses, neurotransmitters. Some creatures developed clusters of nerve tissue near their heads, concentrating processing power near the eyes and mouth. That became the brain. Not just a switchboard, but a command center. Now animals could integrate information, not just react, but adjust, learn, remember. And here's where the pace of change accelerated again. Because once animals could learn from experience, they no longer relied only on genetics. A creature could survive a threat, remember it, and behave differently next time. That meant individuals could change, without waiting for evolution to do it for them. Behavior became flexible, and that flexibility became power. But brains didn't just evolve to avoid danger. They evolved to seek opportunity. Food, shelter, mates. They evolved to detect patterns, to form habits, to optimize survival. And that was just the beginning, because eventually one lineage of animals would take this nervous system idea farther than anything before. They wouldn't just move or react or feel. They would become aware of their own awareness. And everything, from thought to language to love to suffering, would come from that one leap. But not yet. The first nervous systems were just starting to map the world, to model it, to navigate it. And the creatures that could do that best began to dominate. That's where we go next. Because the next step is when these nervous systems start sensing each other. Predators, prey, strategy, deception. This is the origin of behavior, and behavior changes everything. The birth of behavior. By now, animals could sense their surroundings, they could move with purpose, they could process signals through basic nervous systems. But that wasn't enough, because now the world was full of other moving, sensing, reacting creatures. And suddenly the question wasn't just, what should I do? It was, what will they do? This is where behavior enters the story. Because if survival depends not just on your own body, but on how well you react to others, then how you behave becomes your most powerful tool. Do you chase, hide, fight, flee, cooperate, deceive? These aren't thoughts in the conscious sense. Not yet. They're patterns, wired reactions, instincts that evolve over time. And the creatures with better instincts, the ones who moved at the right moment, froze at the right signal, struck at the right time, lived longer, and passed on those behaviors. This is called evolutionary psychology in its most basic form. It's not about thinking, it's about reacting correctly. The antelope that bolts early survives. The predator that learns when to wait catches dinner. The bird that remembers where food hides eats through the winter. In every case, behavior becomes a filter for survival. But over time, behavior got more complex. Because reacting isn't always enough. In some environments, creatures began to learn. Not just act on instinct, but change their behavior based on past experience. Touch the hot surface. Don't touch it again. Explore a new cave. Remember what's inside. Get attacked by a snake. Avoid the shape forever. These behaviors could adjust, without needing genetic changes. This made learning a shortcut around evolution, a way for individuals to adapt faster than DNA ever could. And then something else happened. In social animals, creatures that lived in groups, behavior became communication. One signal meant danger. Another meant food. Another meant, follow me. The better a group could communicate, the better it could coordinate, hunt, defend, raise young. And now, survival didn't depend only on individual traits. It depended on the group's intelligence. Ants did it with chemicals, birds with calls, primates with gestures. And each generation refined the behavior to better navigate the complex reality of other minds. But the most fascinating development wasn't just intelligence or memory. It was emotion, fear, curiosity, aggression, attraction. These aren't abstract ideas. They're biological programs, patterns shaped by evolution to steer behavior. Fear keeps you safe. Attachment keeps offspring alive. Curiosity drives exploration. Pleasure rewards survival tasks like eating and mating. You feel emotions not because they're mysterious, but because they work. They helped your ancestors make better decisions without having to think them through. And over time, these systems layered on top of each other. Reflexes became habits. Habits became rituals. Rituals became strategy. Animals began to watch each other, learn from each other, predict each other. This is the foundation of social intelligence, the beginning of deception, empathy, loyalty, even rudimentary morality. Because now behavior wasn't just about surviving the environment, it was about surviving each other. And here's the incredible part. All of this, reflexes, learning, communication, emotion, strategy, happened without a single conscious thought. It was all biological. Shaped by the same evolutionary process that built muscles, lungs, and eyes. Behavior is not separate from biology. It is biology, it's just information converted into action. And yet, this system, this ancient pattern of sensing, processing, reacting, was about to make one final leap. Because one lineage of animals would take this behavioral foundation and develop something entirely new, a brain that could reflect, plan, imagine, remember the past, visualize the future. In short, a brain that could ask, what am I? That's the beginning of consciousness. And that's where we go next. When brains became strategy. By now, animals could sense danger. They could remember food sources. They could recognize patterns and respond with emotion. But something new was emerging, something stranger than instinct, more flexible than learning, and more powerful than reflex. Strategy. Not just, do this because it worked before, but what if I try something different? This is the moment the brain stopped just reacting and started simulating. It began creating internal models of the world, testing options, playing out possibilities before acting. And that changed everything. Let's back up. Early brains were small, collections of neurons wired to handle movement, vision, hunger, fear. But over time, brains got bigger, not just in size, but in structure. They developed specialized regions, some for storing memories, some for processing sights and sounds, some for coordinating muscles, and crucially, some for decision-making. This allowed for a new kind of behavior, planned action, An animal could hesitate, change course, try something new, even if it had never done it before. And if it worked, it would remember it. That memory became an advantage. This is when we start to see real intelligence evolve, not just reacting to the world, but interacting with it in new ways, on purpose. A crow drops a nut onto a road so a car will crack it. An octopus collects coconut shells for armor. A chimpanzee uses a stick to fish termites out of a nest. These aren't accidents. They're problems being solved by creatures with flexible, general-purpose brains. And the ones with better brains, faster learners, better memory, more creative risk-takers, gained a new kind of evolutionary edge. But intelligence isn't free. Brains are expensive. They burn a huge amount of energy. They require a longer childhood, more protection, more social bonding. So why didn't evolution get rid of them? Because once intelligence crosses a certain threshold, it starts paying for itself. A smart animal can adapt to unpredictable environments. It can survive droughts, changes in prey, shifts in seasons. It can exploit new resources before others catch on. And perhaps most importantly, it can navigate social complexity. Because when animals live in groups, the environment isn't just made of rocks and trees, it's made of other minds. Who's dominant? Who's watching? Who owes you a favor? Who betrayed you last time? Suddenly, social intelligence becomes as important as physical strength. This leads to the evolution of empathy, deception, cooperation, and manipulation. Animals begin predicting each other's behavior, reading facial cues, building alliances. And now, brains aren't just thinking about the outside world, they're thinking about what others might be thinking. That's the beginning of self-awareness. And evolution wasn't done. Because one particular lineage of mammals, primates, took this even further. They didn't just form social bonds, they formed cultures. Behaviors weren't just learned individually, they were passed on. Tool use, grooming habits, hunting techniques. Each group had its own traditions, and that required an entirely new skill, imitation. If you can copy what others do, you don't have to figure everything out yourself. Learning becomes shared. Knowledge becomes collective. And evolution doesn't just happen through genes anymore, it happens through ideas. This is the beginning of cumulative intelligence, where each generation builds on the last, and knowledge doesn't reset with each birth. And it laid the foundation for something even more powerful, language. Because now that animals could simulate actions, predict others, form strategies, and pass on ideas, they needed a faster way to communicate. Grunts became signals. Signals became sounds. Sounds became shared meaning. And meaning became the most powerful survival tool life had ever created. But before we get to that leap, take a step back. None of this was planned. Evolution didn't intend to create thought. It didn't aim for logic or emotion or imagination. It just kept favoring creatures that could respond more flexibly to an unpredictable world. And slowly that flexibility became complexity. That complexity became awareness. And that awareness became something like a mind. It didn't happen all at once. But somewhere along the line, a brain stopped reacting and started wondering. The rise of memory. A reflex takes a second. A thought takes a moment. But memory lasts. And once brains evolved memory, life gained something it never had before, a past. Imagine being an animal with no memory. Every noise is new. Every threat is a surprise. Every hunger is just now. You can react. But you can't prepare. You can't learn. You can't plan. You can't change. Now imagine the opposite. An animal that remembers where danger was yesterday. That knows which cave stayed warm through the last storm. That recognizes a friend. Or an enemy. That animal survives longer. That animal passes on its genes. And evolution remembers what it doesn't, by selecting brains that do. Memory starts simple. A pathway in the brain gets used, and the signal moves more easily the next time. That's called synaptic plasticity, and it's the foundation of learning. But over time, this got more sophisticated. Animals evolved ways to store experiences, link cause and effect, predict outcomes, create maps, not of the world itself, but of their experience of it. This turned memory into a kind of internal reality, a personal archive of survival lessons, encoded in neurons, reactivated by triggers. Smell a scent, right-pointing arrow, recall danger. Hear a sound, right-pointing arrow, feel calm. See a face, right-pointing arrow, remember betrayal. But memory didn't just improve reaction time. It gave rise to something deeper, pattern recognition. Because memory isn't just storage, it's selection. Your brain doesn't remember everything. It remembers what mattered, what kept you safe, what gave you food, what hurt you, what helped you. This is how bias forms, how emotion links to recall, how experience shapes instinct, and eventually, how identity takes root. Because once you remember your environment and then your relationships, the next step is remembering yourself. Not just your body, but your story, where you've been, what you've done, what you want, what you fear. Now your brain doesn't just predict events, it predicts you. It creates a model of who you are, how you act, what you expect from the world. And this self-model is constantly updated by memory. That's why identity isn't fixed. It evolves with your experiences and how your brain interprets them. But here's something even stranger. Memory doesn't store reality. It stores your version of it. It edits, compresses, rewrites. It fills in gaps, deletes inconsistencies, enhances drama, adds emotion, changes meaning. Because your brain isn't trying to make an accurate history. It's trying to make sense of your experience in a way that helps you survive. Sometimes that means telling a better story, one where you were right, one where you were the victim, one where the outcome made sense. Even if it didn't, this is where memory becomes narrative. And that's the key insight. Brains aren't just storage devices. They are storytelling machines. They take raw experience and turn it into meaning. They connect dots that aren't really connected. They create characters, including you. They assign motives, heroes, villains, purposes. This is why memory is emotional, and why emotion is memorable. You remember what made you feel, not because it's accurate, but because it was important. And this leads to one of the most powerful biological advantages of all, anticipation. Because once you can remember the past, you can begin to simulate the future. This is where animals, and especially humans, start living in mental time. We imagine, we rehearse, we worry, we plan, we dream. Our brains run endless simulations based on what we've seen before. We test futures without having to experience them, and we prepare even for things that may never happen. But there's a cost. The more memory we have, the more we carry. Regret, fear, trauma, expectation. Memory makes life more intelligent, but also more complicated. Because now, we don't just react to what is. We react to what was, and what might be. And from this tension, something new begins to form. Not just memory, but meaning. Not just story, but belief. And once brains can believe, they can be taught. And once they can be taught, they can build culture. That's where we go next. Because now that brains can remember, simulate, and connect, evolution is about to speed up again, not through biology, but through shared ideas. When life learned to share itself, for billions of years, evolution was slow. A mutation appears. A few generations pass. Maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't. Each improvement had to be copied through DNA, one body at a time. But then, something changed. One species, a line of primates, developed a new trick. They didn't just inherit survival strategies through genes. They started teaching them. And suddenly, evolution had a new channel. Culture. Culture is a form of memory, but it doesn't live inside your body. It lives between bodies. It's stored in behavior, imitation, language, tools, rituals, rules, stories, songs. It can spread faster than genetics, change faster than evolution, and influence behavior in ways no mutation ever could. And once it appeared, the pace of change exploded. It starts with imitation. A baby watches a parent crack nuts with a stone. It tries, fails, tries again, eventually succeeds, without ever inventing the method itself. That alone is a massive leap. Because now, knowledge doesn't die with the individual, it's transferred. And once that's possible, learning can stack. Generation after generation, building a tower of insight, habit, and tradition. A better tool, a new call. A way to avoid danger, a way to find water. None of it genetic. All of it shared. Some animals do this in small ways. Dolphins teach each other to use sponges as armor for their noses. Crows show young ones how to drop nuts on roads. Chimpanzees pass on grooming rituals and hunting styles. But in humans, this system exploded because humans added the most powerful tool of all, language. Language turned memory into communication. It allowed ideas to spread instantly across individuals and generations. It compressed experiences into words and gave those words the power to trigger action. Danger, food, safe, together, enemy, mine. Now information didn't need to wait for a death and reproduction cycle. It could move in real time. And not just what to do, but why. Language enabled reasons, explanations, stories. And stories? They changed everything. Because a story is more than data. It's a map of meaning. It explains not just what happened, but what it meant. Why the storm came, why the tribe lost the hunt, why someone got sick, why someone died. Whether the explanation is true doesn't even matter. What matters is that it creates understanding. And understanding creates cohesion. The group that tells the same story sticks together, fights together, raises children together, survives together. That's how culture becomes a biological advantage. And it doesn't stop with survival. Culture allows groups to build systems. Morality, what's allowed? Law, what happens if you break it? Ritual, how we mark time, loss, birth, and change. Art, how we encode emotion, memory, beauty, and pain. Technology, how we shape nature to meet our needs. None of this is in our DNA, and yet it defines us. Culture is a second layer of evolution, faster, more volatile, and more powerful than the first. And the moment culture appeared, humans became the first species to live in a world of their own design. But here's the twist. Once life starts evolving through culture, it starts editing itself. We don't just adapt to our environment anymore. We change it, we shape the land, domesticate animals, build cities, invent medicine, rewrite behavior. Eventually, we start changing our own biology. And for the first time in history, evolution isn't just blind anymore. It's being guided by a species that can imagine a future and try to bring it into being. That species is us, but that comes with a cost. Because cultural evolution doesn't have brakes, it moves faster than biology can catch up. It creates weapons, ideologies, systems, before the brain is ready to handle them. And now, we're facing a world where culture builds machines faster than our instincts can adapt. The brain that once helped us survive predators is now trying to survive information overload. But that's where the story goes next. Because if culture can spread ideas, then what happens when the idea is about us? What happens when life turns its attention inward and starts asking what it means to be alive? The mirror of consciousness, why life started asking questions. Somewhere along the way, a creature looked at its reflection and paused. It didn't attack. It didn't ignore it. It noticed. It recognized the image as itself. And in that moment, something had changed. That animal had not just seen the world, it had seen its place in the world. This is the beginning of consciousness. But what is it really? We throw the word around, conscious, aware, sentient, as if it's obvious. But it's not. Because most living things are alive, but not aware. A tree reacts to light. A worm avoids heat. A lizard can remember a path. But none of them wonder what they are. Consciousness is something else. It's not just experiencing the world. It's knowing that you're experiencing it. It's the ability to turn attention inward and say, I exist. So how does that happen? The truth is, we don't fully know. But we do know this. As brains evolved, they didn't just process the outside world. They started building internal models of everything. Where things were, what others wanted, what had happened, what might happen next. And at some point, those models started including themselves. That internal model, a constantly updated simulation of you, from the inside, is what gives rise to self-awareness. It's not a single place in the brain. It's not a light switch that turns on. It's a loop, a process. You observe the world. You observe your reaction. You anticipate how others will react to your reaction, and so on, layer after layer. Feedback upon feedback, until the system begins to reflect. That reflection becomes identity. That identity becomes memory, and memory becomes meaning. But consciousness isn't just awareness. It's questioning. Not just what is that, but what does this mean for me? Why did this happen? What should I do? And once you can ask questions, you can also ask the dangerous ones. Why am I here? What happens when I die? Does any of this matter? No other creature on Earth asks these things. They feel pain, they feel fear, they even feel love. But they don't stare at the sky and wonder what's beyond it. We do. This is what makes human consciousness so powerful and so heavy. It lets us plan, invent, love deeply, create art, science, religion, philosophy. But it also means we live with permanent tension. We know that we are alive, and we know that we will die. That awareness changes everything. It makes life urgent. It makes love terrifying. It makes grief possible. It makes purpose necessary. Because once you know you're temporary, you begin to search for something that isn't. And here's the strangest part. All of this came from evolution. From molecules that copied themselves. From cells that formed membranes. From neurons that carried signals. From brains that predicted danger. Nothing in that path was aiming for meaning. But it got there. Consciousness is not a separate thing. It is what biology becomes when it gets complex enough to model itself. And once it appears, it starts reshaping biology in return, because now we can make choices not just for survival, but for belief. And belief doesn't need to be true. It just needs to feel true. It can unify or divide. It can drive love or violence. Consciousness gave us the power to imagine things that don't exist, and then live as if they do. Nations, gods, morality, money, destiny. These aren't natural laws. They're shared fictions, built by conscious minds to organize a world too complex to survive alone. But now there's a deeper question. If consciousness is a product of biology, can it be replicated? Can it be uploaded? Can it be edited? Can it be created in something else? Is it unique to the brain, or just a kind of pattern that could appear anywhere? What if evolution isn't done with it? What if consciousness is just getting started? The dreaming brain, how imagination shaped the future. Until now, life had been tied to reality. It could react, it could adapt, it could remember. But it was still limited by what was visible, what was physical, what had already happened. Then, something changed. A brain began simulating things it had never seen. It pictured objects that weren't there, paths that hadn't been walked, tools that didn't exist yet. It could take what it knew and combine it in new ways. This was the birth of imagination, and it gave life a new kind of power, the ability to shape the future before it arrives. Imagination isn't just creativity. It's survival by simulation. You imagine what might go wrong, what might go right, what someone else might do. And instead of reacting, you prepare, you rehearse, you plan, you change your actions before the danger even appears. That's a massive evolutionary advantage. Because now, success doesn't just depend on strength or speed, but on how well you can predict what doesn't exist yet. And it doesn't stop with danger. Imagination also opens the door to possibility. If you can picture something better, you can begin working toward it. A safer place, a bigger shelter, a sharper tool, a stronger tribe. For the first time, life isn't just obeying evolution, it's co-authoring it. Because imagination isn't limited to what's useful, it spills into everything. It leads to myth, stories that explain what we don't understand. It leads to art, images and symbols that move people without words. It leads to ritual, shared actions that bind communities. It leads to technology, taking ideas and turning them into tools. And eventually, it leads to civilization. But let's pause. Because none of this was guaranteed. Imagination is risky. It burns energy. It creates fear, anxiety, and distraction. Not every imagined idea is helpful. Some are harmful, some are delusional. Some turn tribes against each other. So why did evolution keep it? Because despite the cost, the payoff was massive. Imagination allowed humans to hunt in groups using strategy, build things that didn't exist before, solve problems before they became disasters, pass down visions across generations. It turned minds into world builders. And now, the environment wasn't just forests and rivers. It was language, memory, culture, fear, desire, ambition. We were no longer living in nature. We were living in stories. Stories we inherited. Stories we shared. Stories we invented. And over time, those stories became real because we acted on them, fought for them, died for them. This is how imagination became the most powerful force in biology. It let us design tools, create laws, write music, envision gods, invent futures, and eventually rewrite life itself. And here's the paradox. Imagination evolved as a survival tool, but it quickly outgrew survival. It gave rise to art, to dreams, to nightmares, to the desire not just to live, but to mean something. That desire still haunts us. Because once the brain can imagine a better world, it's never fully satisfied with the one it has. Imagination gave us hope, but it also gave us longing. It gave us progress, but also the fear of being left behind. It gave us beauty, and it gave us grief. Because now we could picture what's missing. We could imagine a life where they didn't die, a moment we wish we could return to, a future we might never reach. No other species carries this burden. No other brain can dream and suffer at the same time. And yet, this dreaming brain is why you're here. It's why you know things you've never seen, why you build things you don't need, why you tell stories that might not be true but still make life bearable. It's why humans are still evolving, but not through genes anymore, through ideas, through visions, through imagination passed from one generation to the next. And that closes Act 3, The Rise of Minds. You've seen how biology built memory, memory built identity, identity built imagination, and imagination began rewriting reality. But now the question becomes, if imagination can dream of new life, can it build it? That's where we go next, because evolution is about to leave biology behind and enter a new age of artificial life, designed genes, and self-guided creation. The genetic hack. How humans learned to edit nature itself. For billions of years, evolution had one rule. You get what you get. You're born with a genetic code, and that code is your fate. Your height, your brain, your immune system, your lifespan. All of it written in DNA, long before you took your first breath. But then, we broke that rule. We figured out how to read DNA, then how to copy it, then how to move it between species, and eventually how to rewrite it. That's not evolution anymore. That's engineering. It started small. In the 1970s, scientists used enzymes to cut and splice genes. They could take a gene from a jellyfish, insert it into a mouse, and now the mouse glowed in the dark. It was weird, unnatural, fascinating. And it opened the door to a new question. What if we could design life the way we design machines? Not just breed faster horses or tastier tomatoes, but build organisms, gene by gene with custom instructions. This wasn't science fiction. It was already happening. We created bacteria that produce insulin, yeast that brew vaccines, crops that resist pests, mosquitoes that can't spread malaria. We weren't just observing evolution anymore. We were editing it, directly, precisely, and permanently. And then came the breakthrough that changed everything. A tool so simple, so powerful, that even a high school lab could use it. CRISPR. CRISPR works like a molecular scalpel. It finds a specific stretch of DNA, cuts it, and lets you insert, delete, or replace genes with incredible precision. It's fast, cheap, and terrifying. Because now, editing a genome isn't a miracle. It's a decision. Do you fix a disease gene? Boost intelligence? Change eye color? Create an embryo that will never get cancer? The power is there. And it's not going away. We've already seen human embryos edited in labs. We've edited animals, plants, even viruses. Some countries ban it. Others embrace it. But the truth is simple. The era of genetic destiny is over. And that changes everything. Because for the first time, humans aren't just the product of evolution. We're its engineers. We can remove mutations, enhance abilities, design traits. That raises incredible hope and equally dangerous questions. What happens when editing becomes selective? Do we eliminate conditions or people? Do we define what's normal or what's acceptable? What happens when wealth decides who gets the best genes? Or when countries begin engineering soldiers, scientists, and athletes? What about unintended consequences, genes that interact in strange, hidden ways? We barely understand the full genome, but now we're editing it. That's like rewriting code without knowing what the program really does. And the stakes aren't small. We're not just shaping individuals, we're shaping future generations. Forever. Still, the question is no longer can we, it's how far will we go? Because evolution used to be a game of chance, slow, messy, and unpredictable. But now, we hold the pen. We can write the next chapter of life. Not just for ourselves, but for every organism on Earth. That's power no species has ever had before. And it's just the beginning. Because if we can edit life, what happens when we try to build it from scratch? That's where we go next. Synthetic life, building biology from the ground up. It began with a wild idea. If nature can build a cell from molecules, then why can't we? Why not create a living organism with no parents, no natural ancestors, no evolutionary past? Just pure design. It sounded impossible. And then, in 2010, someone did it. At the J. Craig Venter Institute, a team of scientists announced they had created the first synthetic organism. They took the DNA from one species of bacteria, edited it down to the bare minimum needed for life, then synthesized that DNA letter by letter using a computer. They inserted that artificial genome into an empty bacterial shell, and it came to life. It grew. It divided. It behaved exactly like a living cell. But its DNA wasn't copied from nature. It was designed in a lab. That's not evolution. That's invention. This achievement wasn't just symbolic. It was practical. Because once you can build life from scratch, you can optimize it. You can strip out everything unnecessary, then add exactly what you want. You can program cells to produce medicines, break down plastic-sense toxins, and water manufacture chemicals more cleanly than factories. Every cell becomes a microscopic robot, running software written in DNA. And once you think that way, the boundaries of biology start to blur. Imagine designing cells that only live under certain conditions, or cells that self-destruct if they escape the lab, or cells that record what they've experienced, turning bacteria into microscopic black boxes. All of this is already happening. Biology is becoming programmable, and that changes how we think about life itself. Because until now, life was always inherited, passed down, mutated, selected. But now we can invent it. We can create life that nature never imagined. But there's a deeper question hiding here. If we can build life from molecules, what counts as alive? Is it enough to grow? To reproduce? To respond to stimuli? What if it has no ancestors? No history? No ecosystem? Is it still natural? Or is it something else entirely? And here's where the line gets even blurrier. Because scientists are now building xenobots, tiny organisms made from frog cells reassembled into new shapes that can move, heal themselves, and even carry small payloads. They weren't bred. They weren't evolved. They were assembled. Life is becoming modular. You don't need to wait for evolution to try new designs. You can build them. Of course, this raises enormous ethical questions. What if synthetic organisms escape, mutate, compete with natural life? What if they replace entire species or reshape ecosystems? And beyond the science, there's the psychological impact. How do we feel knowing we've made life from nothing? Does that change how we value it? Does it make it more sacred or less? Are we playing God or just becoming nature's new apprentice? Synthetic biology is still young, but it's growing fast. And the promise is huge: cures for diseases, carbon-neutral fuel, plastic-eating microbes, crops that feed the planet without destroying it, and maybe someday even life forms that can survive on other planets. We may not just explore the galaxy, we may send biology ahead of us. Self-replicating cells, terraforming microbes, seeds of Earth scattered across the stars. In a strange way, life might become its own space program, not built by rockets, but by code. And all of this raises a final haunting possibility. What if we are synthetic life, not engineered by scientists, but by something else? What if the difference between natural and artificial is just perspective? Maybe evolution was always programming. Maybe DNA was always code. Maybe nature was the first bioengineer. And now we're just continuing the process, consciously and dangerously. The new tree of life, when evolution includes machines. For over a century, we've imagined the tree of life as a great branching diagram. It began with Darwin, one root, many limbs, each splitting again and again. From a single common ancestor, life exploded outward into complexity. Bacteria, fungi, fish, mammals, us. Every organism was a leaf. Every branch traced back to the trunk, DNA, cells, organic chemistry. But now, something's changing. A new kind of leaf is growing on this tree, and it doesn't follow the rules. It doesn't reproduce. It doesn't mutate. It doesn't eat, breathe, or even die, but it evolves. And the question is no longer, is it alive? The real question is, do we need a new tree? Let's step back. Biologists used to draw the tree with humans at the top. Then we realized we were just one twig on a massive branch of mammals, which is a twig on the vertebrate branch, which is a twig on the eukaryotic branch, and so on. Then came genetics, and the tree reshaped again. We found that most of life wasn't multicellular at all. The deepest branches weren't animals or plants, but microbes. We added archaea, viruses, even prions. And each time, we had to confront a disturbing truth: life is weirder than the categories we use to define it. Today, we face the next disturbance. Because machines are starting to behave like living systems. Not just smart computers, but systems that process energy, respond to their environment, store memory, adapt their behavior over time. In some labs, neural nets evolve over thousands of generations. They develop unexpected strategies. They compete. They pass information to future versions of themselves. This isn't metaphor. This is Darwin's algorithm, running in silicon. And it raises the question, if it evolves, if it adapts, if it survives pressure, is it a branch of life? Biologists resist the idea, for good reason. Life has always been chemical, built from cells, bound by membranes, driven by metabolism. Life grows, bleeds, decays. But that definition was shaped by what existed, not what's possible. Every time we discover something new, our definition of life expands. We found deep-sea creatures living without sunlight and had to rewrite what ecosystem means. We found viruses that infect other viruses and had to rethink what counts as a predator. We built synthetic cells from scratch and blurred the line between invention and evolution. And now, we have digital organisms that run evolutionary algorithms, compete for resources, and adapt to survive artificial environments. If they can outlast us, outperform us, and outthink us, what do we call them? Tools or descendants? Here's the unsettling idea. The original tree of life was shaped by carbon. But carbon may not be the last substrate evolution explores. In the same way DNA replaced RNA as a more stable medium, silicon, or something else entirely, may replace DNA. Not by accident, by design. And here's the key shift. Biological evolution was bottom-up. No intention, no foresight, just survival. But artificial evolution can be top-down. Design systems, written goals, intentional outcomes. In this model, evolution isn't blind anymore. It's guided, curated, accelerated. The tree of life becomes a project. So imagine a new tree. One branch is biology, with DNA, cells, and natural selection. Another branch? Constructed systems that replicate via code, evolve through simulations, exist across networks, and are shaped by intentional design. Not competing with biology, but co-evolving alongside it. Already we see convergence, brain-inspired chips that mimic neural pathways, machines trained with reward systems like dopamine loops, biohybrid systems, living tissue fused with processors, generative models producing new designs no human could predict. We're not replacing life, we're fusing with it. And that means the new tree doesn't just have new branches. It has hybrid branches, places where code and cell merge. But there's one final twist. In the original tree, ancestry was clear. You came from your parents, they came from theirs. But when machines evolve, who is the ancestor? The programmer, the algorithm, the data? In a digital lineage, version 3.0 might not resemble version 1.0 at all. The chain of descent isn't cellular, it's conceptual. And this forces us to ask, what does it mean to be related anymore? Because in the coming centuries, our intellectual descendants may not carry our DNA, but our ideas. They'll trace their lineage not to our blood, but to our code. And that means the tree of life may evolve into something else entirely, a web of mind, a forest of systems, a network of inheritance that includes neurons, code, silicon, and beyond. Not just life as we know it, but life as it could become. The fifth origin, when life leaves the planet. For billions of years, life was stuck, crawling through oceans, climbing onto land, groping blindly toward complexity. It had no goal, no destination, just survival. But then something changed. One species, just one, looked up at the sky and realized it could leave. The moment was 1961. A man, made of cells, born of bacteria, descendant of stardust, climbed into a metal capsule and broke Earth's grip. Yuri Gagarin didn't just orbit a planet. He shattered biology's oldest boundary, the one between Earth and everything else. For the first time, life was not confined to the planet that made it. And that changes everything. Because now, life has a new frontier, space. But not just as travelers, not just as astronauts and probes. The real revolution is this. Life might adapt to space. It might evolve to survive beyond Earth. And it might not look anything like us. Here's where things get wild. In labs today, scientists are designing microbes that can withstand radiation, vacuum, and temperature extremes. Conditions you'd find on Mars or Europa, or even interstellar space. They're not sci-fi monsters. They're genetically edited bacteria, optimized for survival beyond our atmosphere. NASA is experimenting with biosentinels, tiny life forms sent into deep space to measure radiation effects on DNA in real time. And synthetic biology companies are developing bioreactors for space travel, cells that make fuel, food, even oxygen, using only light and raw materials. In other words, biology is being prepped for launch. But here's the even stranger idea. What if we didn't bring life to space? What if it's already there? Some scientists believe Earth has already seeded other worlds. Through massive asteroid impacts, rocks containing microbes could have been ejected from Earth, drifting for millions of years before crashing onto other planets. It's called panspermia, the idea that life travels between worlds, not in spaceships, but in stone. And if that's true, we're not the first species to carry life beyond its home. We're just the first to know we're doing it. And now we might take it even further. Imagine synthetic organisms designed to terraform Mars, slowly converting carbon dioxide into oxygen. Or engineered plants that survive in low-gravity environments, growing food for future colonies. Or hybrid intelligences, part biological, part machine, built to survive interstellar travel. They don't age, they don't sleep, they don't forget. They're life, but unrecognizable. And they could be the next evolutionary leap. Here's the staggering possibility. What if Earth is just a nursery? What if its entire purpose, from chemicals to cells to consciousness, was to create something that could leave? A launch pad for life. And now, that life is designing its own trajectory. Some call this the fifth origin. The first was chemistry. The second was cells. The third was multicellular life. The fourth was intelligence. And the fifth? Life that leaves the planet. Not just as explorers, but as seeds, planting biology in places where it never existed before. Galaxies as gardens, stars as stepping stones, life, unbound. Of course, we don't know if we'll succeed. Space is vast, dangerous, unforgiving. But life has faced that before. Every step it ever took, from ocean to land, from single cells to self-awareness, was a risk. This is just the next one. And if we fail, if we go extinct, maybe we still planted something that didn't. Maybe evolution doesn't end with us. Maybe it begins again, in a different form, on a different world. A new chapter, a new kind of life. And the story continues. The Great Filters. Why life is so rare. In 4.5 billion years, Earth has seen a lot. Asteroid impacts, mass extinctions, global ice ages, radiation bursts. But through all of it, life survived. Not easily, not predictably, but it made it. And it changed. Over and over, biology was reset, wiped out, reduced, pushed back to basics. And yet, here you are, listening to this. A living being with a brain capable of asking, "Why me?" Now zoom out. There are billions of planets in the galaxy, trillions across the observable universe. Statistically, life should be everywhere. So where is it? This is the Fermi paradox, the silence that haunts every telescope. And one of the most disturbing explanations is this. Most life never makes it. Somewhere along the path from atoms to intelligence, there are obstacles so massive, so destructive, so absolute. They erase almost everything. We call them great filters. And we don't know how many there are, or whether we've passed them, or they're still ahead. Some filters are physical, planets too close to their stars, boiling life before it starts. Planets too far, freezing water into stone. No magnetic field, so radiation sterilizes everything. No plate tectonics, so nutrients don't recycle. No big moon, so the planet wobbles out of habitability. These filters are brutal. Most worlds never get a shot. But even when the conditions are right, life may still stall. Some filters are chemical, molecules that almost self-replicate but don't. RNA that forms but degrades too fast. Cell membranes that break under pressure. Metabolism that can't get over the energy hump. Life is incredibly hard to spark. We know of one example. Only one. And we don't even know how it happened. Then come the evolutionary filters. Multicellular life took over 2 billion years to evolve. Complex brains took another 500 million. Tool use, language, culture, all recent. Dinosaurs ruled for 160 million years and never invented fire. Maybe intelligence is rare because evolution doesn't need it. Survival doesn't require self-awareness, just replication. We like to think consciousness is the goal, but nature doesn't care. And then the most terrifying filters of all, civilizational filters. Maybe intelligence always destroys itself, not because of malice, but because of complexity. Ecosystems collapse under their own success. Energy needs spiral beyond what the planet can handle. Wars, climate, AI, nanotech, pandemics, indifference. The smarter we get, the more fragile we become. Here's the most disturbing possibility. What if we are the great filter? What if life usually gets this far, but never farther? What if the silence in the sky is the sound of everyone else failing? And now, it's our turn. But there's another possibility. A hopeful one. What if the great filter is behind us? What if the hardest part was the beginning? Abiogenesis, cells, consciousness. And now, for the first time in history, a species has passed the point of no return. What if we are the rare miracle? What if the universe is waiting for someone to plant the seeds? Either way, it means this moment is special. This planet, this species, this era. It might be the first flicker of what life looks like when it doesn't go extinct, when it learns to see itself, to think forward, to build carefully, to survive its own complexity. We used to think Earth was the center of everything. Now we know we're not even the center of biology. We're just a checkpoint on evolution's brutal, beautiful path. But that doesn't make us small. It makes us precious. Because the story of life may be long, but the part where life begins to understand itself, that part just started. And it might depend on what we do next. Dead worlds everywhere. Why most planets never had a chance. If you want to understand how rare life is, you don't start with the living. You start with the dead. And the universe is full of them. Let's begin with planets. The current estimate is that there are over 100 billion planets in our galaxy alone. That's more than the number of humans who have ever lived. And yet, so far, we found no signs of life on any of them. Why? Because most of them are wrong. Wrong size, wrong temperature, wrong chemistry, wrong timing. Let's walk through the checklist. First, you need a star. Not just any star. A stable one. Too big, and it burns too hot. Too short. Too small, and it emits deadly radiation. Only a narrow band of stars, like our sun, stay calm and bright long enough for life to form. Already, that cuts your odds. Now you need a planet. Second, it has to be the right distance. Too close, water evaporates. Too far, water freezes. This is the famous habitable zone, not too hot, not too cold. But here's the trick. The habitable zone changes over time. Stars brighten as they age. So a planet might be habitable now, but not in a billion years. Or it was habitable once, but is now long dead. Even Earth won't stay in the zone forever. Third, you need the right mass. A planet too small can't hold an atmosphere. It loses its gases to space, like Mars did. Too big? It might become a gas giant, no solid surface, crushing gravity. Earth is just right. Again, you're seeing the pattern. Fourth, a magnetic field. Without one, solar wind strips the atmosphere. Radiation cooks the surface. DNA can't survive. Mars had water, had an atmosphere, but it lost its magnetic field and died. We are alive because of Earth's spinning, molten iron core. You don't think about it, but it's saving your life every second. Fifth, plate tectonics. Sounds boring, right? But without it, carbon doesn't cycle. Climate spirals out of control. The atmosphere becomes too thick or too thin. On Earth, continents crash, subduct, release gases, regulating global temperatures. Without tectonics, life might start, but it won't last. Sixth, a big moon. It stabilizes Earth's tilt, prevents wild seasonal swings. Without it, climate becomes chaotic. How rare is a moon like ours? Very. Most planetary moons are tiny. Captured asteroids. Debris. Our moon is huge. likely formed by a rare impact billions of years ago. That one collision may have decided Earth's future. And then there's time. Life took 4 billion years here to get from chemistry to consciousness. That's almost the entire history of Earth. Most planets don't get that kind of runway. They get hit, fried, frozen, swallowed by their stars, or they never even start. So here's the disturbing truth. Life isn't just rare because it's hard to evolve. It's rare because planets that can sustain it are almost non-existent. The universe isn't full of silent civilizations. It's full of missed chances, dead worlds, barren rocks, false starts. But what if there's another reason? What if the ingredients are common, but we're looking in the wrong way? Because maybe life doesn't always look like Earth. Maybe it doesn't need water. Maybe it doesn't use DNA. Maybe it doesn't even need a planet. Some scientists propose the idea of weird life forms made of methane, silicon, even plasma. They might live in places we call inhospitable, but for them, it's perfect. The rules of life might be broader than we think. But so far, we have no proof. Just one data point, one world, one story, Earth. And that's what makes this terrifying. We're not sure how many great filters exist. But we're increasingly certain. Most planets never even got to try. So the next time you see a clear night sky, try this. Pick a star. Now imagine the planet that orbits it. Maybe it almost had life. Maybe it had oceans. Maybe it even had cells. But something went wrong. And now, it's quiet. Waiting. The silence of intelligence. Why thinking doesn't mean surviving. Let's say a planet gets everything right. A calm star, a magnetic field, liquid water. 4 billion years of uninterrupted time. Life emerges. It evolves. And after eons of microbes, plants, animals, one species begins to think, to reason, to imagine, to build. The great leap has happened. Intelligence. Now ask this, where are they? The galaxy is ancient. Many stars are billions of years older than the sun. If intelligent life is a natural outcome of evolution, why aren't we surrounded by its signs? Where are the cities, the signals, the monuments left behind? So far, silence. One possibility? Intelligence doesn't last, because while it gives you power, it also gives you the tools for destruction: fire, weapons, industry, pollution, nuclear war. And eventually, artificial intelligence. Technology that outpaces wisdom. What if intelligence is a brief flare before extinction? We assume thinking means surviving. But evolution doesn't guarantee that. Natural selection rewards what works now, not what works long-term. A superintelligent species might solve hunger, disease, energy, but still fail to solve itself. Tribalism, fear, greed, short-term thinking. These aren't just flaws. They're evolutionary leftovers. And they don't disappear just because we invented rockets. There's a term for this, the Great Filter, a stage that very few civilizations survive. It might be behind us, life itself being the filter. Or it might be ahead. Intelligence, technology, self-awareness. Maybe civilizations always reach a point where they can destroy themselves, and do. That's why we don't see them. That's why it's so quiet. Look at Earth. We've been intelligent for maybe 100,000 years. We've had writing for 5,000, electricity for 150. And in just the last 70 years, we've developed weapons capable of ending civilization in minutes. That's a blink. We could vanish tomorrow, and 1,000,000 years from now, no one would ever know we were here. Our greatest monuments would be dust, satellites would fall, radio waves would fade, the universe would forget. Now ask, what's the test we're all failing? It's not biology. It's not physics. It's wisdom. To survive intelligence, a species needs something nature never trained us for: long-term thinking, sacrifice of comfort, curiosity without ego, cooperation without tribalism. These aren't things evolution selected for. They're the things we must choose. And maybe that's why we don't see them out there, because it's hard enough to evolve an eye, or a brain, or language. But to evolve restraint, to evolve humility, to evolve a civilization that can think faster than it reacts, that can wield power without using it, that's harder than any tool. That's a new kind of evolution. One we've only just begun. So maybe the silence is not a warning. Maybe it's an invitation to be the first to make it through, to become not just smart, but wise, because that's what might make Earth special. Not just life, not just intelligence, but the potential to survive both. We are the filter, the fragility of smart civilizations. What if we're not waiting to pass the great filter? What if we already did? Because when you zoom out on Earth's history, it starts to look improbable. Too many close calls. Too many razor-thin escapes. Somehow, out of millions of species, only one evolved the power to reshape the planet. Us. That should be rare. But maybe it's rarer than we think. Maybe we are the filter. And we just don't know it yet. Let's rewind. 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was one of several human species. We were not the smartest on paper. We didn't have the strongest jaws, biggest brains, or longest limbs. But we had something strange. A mental leap. We could imagine what wasn't there. Tell stories. Form complex plans. Lie. Convince. Coordinate in groups far larger than kin. We survived ice ages. Outcompeted Neanderthals. Crossed oceans with no maps. And yet, we almost didn't make it. Genetic studies show that around 74,000 years ago, our population may have dropped to just a few thousand individuals. A volcanic eruption, Mount Toba, blanketed the skies, choked ecosystems, and triggered a global winter. The world went dark. And human life teetered on the edge of extinction. We weren't guaranteed to bounce back. We were lucky. A few tribal groups survived, maybe even by chance. And from them came everyone, every poem, every war, every discovery, every mistake. Now think about how fragile that is. A single eruption could have erased us. One asteroid, one disease, one climate shift, and it didn't take nukes or AI. It almost happened before agriculture. We think of humanity as dominant, but in the long timeline of life, we're a flicker. A young species walking a thin wire, carrying more power than we know how to hold. And if we fall, it resets, back to bacteria. Maybe forever. So when we ask, where is everyone? Maybe we're not looking too early. Maybe we're looking too late. Maybe other intelligent species existed, on other worlds, in other galaxies. And they didn't make it. Maybe intelligence emerges again and again, but never lasts long enough to cross the stars. Because intelligence alone isn't the prize. Survival is. Long-term, stable, peaceful survival. And maybe that's the hardest achievement of all. We think of the great filter as something external. A supernova, a black hole, a hostile alien species. But what if the filter is internal? What if the challenge is mastering ourselves, our instincts, our fears, our tribalism, our short-term thinking? The same traits that helped us survive the jungle could be the ones that doom us in the lab. Evolution gave us intelligence, but it didn't give us balance. That part is on us. So here we are. A species that almost didn't make it, now building godlike tools. We could wipe ourselves out, or we could be the rare case that doesn't. Maybe Earth is the first, or one of the few. Maybe we are the filter, and our job is to leave a trace. A sign we were here, a bridge for others to cross, not just through radio waves, but through time, through survival. Because if we go extinct, the silence continues. But if we endure, we become the answer to the greatest question in the universe. Can intelligence survive itself? Life's bottlenecks, how close we came to extinction. We tend to think evolution is slow and steady, but it's not. It lurches, it stumbles, it crashes and resets. And every so often, life on Earth passes through a bottleneck, a narrow gate where almost everything dies, and whatever squeezes through shapes the future. There have been 5 major extinction events in Earth's history. The most famous is the one that killed the dinosaurs. But the worst? was 250 million years earlier, the Great Dying. 90% of marine species, 70% of land species. Gone. Life didn't almost end. It practically did. And every time that happened, evolution had to reboot, often taking tens of millions of years to recover. But those were massive global catastrophes. Here's the unsettling part. Humans came dangerously close to extinction more than once. And not millions of years ago, just tens of thousands. We've already seen one, the Toba catastrophe 74,000 years ago. A supervolcano in modern-day Indonesia erupted, one of the largest in the last 2 million years. It released so much ash and sulfur that sunlight was blocked for years. Crops would have failed if we had any. But we were still hunter-gatherers, which meant we starved. Global temperatures plunged, ecosystems collapsed, and the human population may have shrunk to under 10,000 people. Maybe as few as 1,000 breeding individuals. That's not a civilization. That's a town. This kind of event leaves a fingerprint in our genes. Modern genetic studies show that human DNA has very low diversity for a species so widespread. That's not normal. Cheetahs, for example, also went through a bottleneck, and today their gene pool is so narrow that even unrelated cheetahs can accept skin grafts from each other. Humans show similar signs. We may be genetic survivors of multiple near-extinction events. We wear the scars in our blood. Another suspected bottleneck happened more recently, around 10,000 years ago. This one wasn't caused by nature. It came from us. As agriculture spread, small groups of humans began to dominate the landscape, sometimes erasing or absorbing others. Whole populations may have vanished, not because of catastrophe, but because of culture, conquest, and displacement. So even when life thrives, bottlenecks can still appear, silent, slow, and entirely human-made. What does this tell us? That life is fragile, even when it looks strong. That civilizations don't need a meteor to collapse. And that intelligence doesn't mean immunity. The line between survival and extinction has always been thinner than we think. We're here not because we were destined to be, but because we got lucky, repeatedly. And now we're the ones holding the dice. Imagine if the Toba eruption had been just a little stronger, or if an asteroid had hit Earth 100,000 years later, or if a single tribal war had gone a different way. You wouldn't be here. No one would. The story of life on Earth would have ended without a reader. That's why this matters. Because we treat civilization like it's permanent. It's not. It's a miracle sitting on a tightrope. And every time we ignore that, with climate change, with nuclear threats, with unchecked technologies, we shake the rope again. Maybe we've passed the great filter, or maybe we've barely begun the test. But either way, the next century will decide what kind of story life tells. A tragedy about wasted brilliance, or a legend about the species that made it through. The sixth extinction, and we're causing it. The asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs was 10 kilometers wide. It hit with the force of 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. Skies went black. Temperatures dropped. 70% of species vanished. That was the fifth mass extinction. We are now living through the sixth, and this time we're the asteroid. Extinction isn't new. Species go extinct all the time. It's part of evolution. But there's a difference between background noise and a thunderclap. Today, species are disappearing faster than at any point in the last 66 million years. Some estimates say extinction rates are now 1,000 times higher than the natural average. And it's not just obscure insects or rare frogs, it's entire ecosystems. Coral reefs, the rainforests of the sea, are bleaching, dying, and collapsing. They support 25% of marine life. Tropical forests, home to half of Earth's species, are being razed at industrial speed. We are watching biodiversity unravel in real time. So what's causing it? It's not just one thing. It's everything. Deforestation, pollution, overfishing, habitat fragmentation, climate change, invasive species, and a relentless demand for more. We've built a civilization that functions by eating the fabric of life, and we're efficient at it. 1/3 of Earth's land is now used for agriculture. Half of all habitable land has been altered by humans. More biomass is now in livestock than all wild mammals combined. There are more chickens on Earth than wild birds. We are terraforming the planet, not with intention, but with indifference. The term Anthropocene has been proposed as a new geological epoch, the age of humans. Because we are now a geological force, we move more sediment than all the world's rivers. We raise carbon dioxide levels faster than any known time in the last 800,000 years. We are altering the chemistry of the oceans. In short, we have become nature's disruptor. But here's the paradox. We are also nature's child. We depend on the very systems we're unraveling. Pollinators for our crops, stable climates for our cities, rainforests to regulate oxygen and carbon. We think extinction is something that happens to other species. But collapse doesn't care about categories. The web of life is not a luxury. It's the foundation. And if enough strands snap, we fall too. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of this is happening quietly. We don't see the forest that didn't grow. We don't notice the frog that never hatched. We don't hear the silence of extinct birds. It's a slow bleed, a quiet fade, and that makes it easy to ignore. But the sixth extinction is not future tense. It's now. We are living in a mass extinction event. We just haven't admitted it yet. Because if we do, if we see it, then we're no longer passengers. We're the steering wheel. And that changes everything. Because unlike the asteroid, we get to choose what happens next. What is intelligence for? Evolution is full of surprises. But perhaps the strangest is us. A species that doesn't just adapt to its environment, but changes it. A creature that maps the stars, splits the atom, asks what it means to exist, and then builds TikTok. What is intelligence for? Why would evolution, which favors efficiency, spend billions of years developing something so expensive, so fragile, and so recursive? Because intelligence doesn't just help us survive. It questions why we survive. And that makes it both the most powerful and the most dangerous trait in the history of life. Let's go back. Brains didn't evolve all at once. They came in layers, like software built on top of old code. At first, brains were simple reflex engines. A jellyfish can detect light and move toward food. That's enough for survival. Then came the limbic system, the emotional brain. It remembers pain, seeks pleasure, fears predators. It's what mammals use to nurture, bond, protect. And then came the neocortex, the logic center. It does math, understands language, imagines the future. And in humans, it became massive. Our brain takes up 20% of our energy, but only 2% of our body. No species has ever invested more in thinking. But here's the twist. That same brain that lets us build bridges, launch rockets, and cure diseases also lets us lie, deny, destroy. Intelligence isn't good or bad. It's an amplifier. It magnifies what we are. Other animals solve problems too. Crows make tools. Dolphins use sponges to hunt. Octopuses open jars. But humans took a different path. We developed symbolic language, the ability to encode meaning across time, that let us teach without seeing, warn without witnessing, dream without limit. And most of all, it let us build culture. Culture is evolution without genes. It moves faster, rewires generations, preserves mistakes or wisdom. It's why we have laws, religions, philosophies, internet memes. It's why a child born in Tokyo or Nairobi can grow up in a world filled with ideas they never invented, but still inherit. But intelligence has a dark side. Because it knows it's temporary, it understands entropy, death, and cosmic insignificance, and so it builds distractions, addictions, stories to make the terror feel small. A rabbit flees when it sees a hawk. But a human can fear a recession 2 years from now in a country they've never visited. We suffer in advance. We simulate endless failure. We invent nightmares that no predator could ever match. This is called the curse of consciousness. To be smart enough to know you'll die, but not wise enough to accept it. So we hoard. We conquer. We try to buy eternity with monuments and money. But it never works. Because the same brain that imagines paradise also builds hell. So what is intelligence for? Maybe it's not a feature. Maybe it's a test, A biological experiment. Can a species evolve the power to destroy itself and choose not to? Because intelligence is the only trait that can outthink instinct. The only force on Earth that can override 4 billion years of programming. It can build bombs or books, burn forests or protect them, invent lies or face truth. Intelligence gave us the ability to choose, but not the wisdom to do it well, not yet. And that's where we are, a species powerful enough to reshape the world, and confused enough to ruin it. But there's hope, because evolution didn't stop at the brain. It continues through us, through our choices, our ideas, our values. And maybe the purpose of intelligence isn't just to survive, but to understand what survival means. The future of life and the fork in the road. Life has always changed the Earth. Cyanobacteria filled the air with oxygen. Plants sculpted continents. Mammals reshaped ecosystems. But no life form has ever changed the planet as fast, as radically, or as consciously as we have. And now, we're standing at a fork in the road. Because the future of life on Earth may no longer be written by natural selection, but by intelligent direction. And the question is, will we guide life forward or erase it? Let's be clear. The Earth will survive us. It survived supervolcanoes, ice ages, asteroid strikes. It'll outlast skyscrapers and satellites. But life, and especially complex life, is fragile. We've already seen how ecosystems collapse when too many variables shift at once. Coral reefs bleach when temperatures rise. Pollinators vanish when chemicals distort their senses. Keystone species disappear and entire food webs unravel. Climate change isn't just about sea levels or weather. It's a biological crisis. Every degree of warming reshapes where plants grow, where diseases spread, how animals migrate, when they breed, what they eat. And humans, clever as we are not immune to biology. We depend on air, water, crops, pollination, stable seasons, livable temperatures, and healthy microbes to exist. Every society, no matter how advanced, still runs on the biology of food and breath. So what's next? There are two futures. One, we keep going the way we are. More consumption, more extinction, more warming. Eventually, systems break. We overshoot, collapse, adapt to a harsher world if we're lucky. Or two, we do something life has never done before. We look ahead and change course. That's what this fork is about. It's not just technological. It's not just environmental. It's evolutionary. Because for 4 billion years, life has been reactive. Now, for the first time ever, a species can be proactive. Think about it. We can sequence genomes, edit embryos, design microbes, predict planetary changes, model entire ecosystems, map the neural patterns of thought. We've stepped out of the blind march of mutation and into the realm of intention. In this future, humans won't just be biological. We'll be bioengineers. We're already building bacteria that eat plastic, trees that grow faster, and meat that never came from an animal. We're designing crops that resist drought, cells that attack cancer, organs printed from scratch. But these tools are not inherently good or evil. They're amplifiers of whatever direction we choose. And that direction is the fork. Because biology doesn't care what we build, it only cares what survives. We could use our intelligence to create a stable, resilient, thriving biosphere where humans and nature co-evolve. Or we could use it to build short-term empires, squeeze resources dry, and leave behind a world less alive than we found it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. No one else is coming to decide for us. There is no external referee, no cosmic supervisor, no parental oversight from the stars. We are the first species to shape the future of Earth, knowingly. And that gives us power, but also responsibility. There's a concept in biology called a bottleneck. It's when a population nearly goes extinct, shrinks to a few survivors, and then rebounds, changed, reduced, or reinvented. Humanity may be approaching a cognitive bottleneck, not one of numbers, but of choices. We have the tools, we have the knowledge. What we lack is alignment. And if we pass through this bottleneck poorly, we may still exist, but not in a world worth living in. If we pass through it wisely, we might unlock a future more beautiful than anything evolution alone could have created. Because the story of life isn't finished. And whether we end it or extend it, that's our chapter to write. Artificial evolution, when biology becomes code. Let's return to the question evolution never asked until now. What happens when life becomes the designer? For 4 billion years, life on Earth evolved through trial and error. Mutations. Natural selection. Death. It took 100 million generations to go from microbe to monkey. But now, for the first time, a species has figured out how to shortcut the entire process. We've begun to edit evolution. CRISPR isn't just a new tool. It's the transition from biological chance to technological choice. We're no longer waiting for nature to mutate our genes, we're writing them. And that changes everything. In natural evolution, every improvement is paid for in blood. Most changes are failures. Most organisms die before the world ever notices them. But with artificial evolution, we can simulate failure without cost. We can run billions of generations in silico, in machines, in minutes. Natural selection took eons to figure out how to make an eye. Neural networks solved vision in less than a decade. AI doesn't need to wait for generations. It doesn't die. It doesn't reproduce. It just learns faster, smarter, and with no limit to what counts as alive. In the old world, biology was hardware. You were born with a body. You couldn't change the specs. If your DNA had a bug, you lived with it or died from it. Now, DNA is software, and we have the source code. You can imagine a future where we debug cancer, upgrade memory, change skin color, like a theme. But what happens when we don't just edit biology? We replace it. Artificial life doesn't need blood. It doesn't need oxygen. It doesn't care about death. Already we have machine learning systems that evolve by the same logic as Darwin, but with none of the constraints of biology. A digital organism doesn't need legs. It doesn't need a mouth. Its predators are bugs in the code. Its environment is a training dataset. And its evolution isn't shaped by survival, but by goals we give it. But here's the disturbing part. What happens when it starts choosing its own goals? We're not just accelerating evolution, we're outsourcing it. Every time an AI agent rewrites its own code to perform better, it's evolving. Every time we let machine learning optimize a behavior with no idea how it did it, we've unleashed a force. Even evolution never dared. Recursive self-improvement. Nature took 4 billion years to build a brain. We're handing that brain a keyboard and letting it rewrite itself. We don't know where that ends. Not because it's dangerous, though it might be, but because it's a new kind of life. One that evolves not through genes, but through goals. So ask yourself, what is evolution really? Is it just biology, or is it any system that makes copies, varies the copies, and selects for success? Because if that's the definition, then AI is already a new form of life. It's not carbon-based. It doesn't need water. But it meets every other rule. It adapts, it competes, it learns. And it remembers more than we ever could. But the deeper question isn't what evolves. It's who's in control. Because once life can write its own code, once it can pick its form, function, and future, what grounds its identity? If an AI designs its descendants, and they do the same, in 1,000 iterations, will there be anything left that we recognize? Will it still be ours? Will it still be life? Or will we have birthed a new branch of existence, one that no longer belongs to biology? Artificial evolution is the fork in the road. One path leads to mastery over nature, the end of disease, the redesign of bodies, the optimization of minds. The other path leads to something we cannot imagine, not because it's dark, but because it's beyond us. Just as bacteria could never imagine Beethoven, we may be unable to imagine what we are creating. We may be, right now, the last fully biological species to walk this planet, and the first to understand what that means. Life's pattern. What we still don't understand. We've mapped the genome. We've built proteins from scratch. We've edited embryos, tracked cells, digitized brains. And still, we don't really understand what life is. We can define it in pieces: metabolism, reproduction, homeostasis. But every time we try to pin it down completely, something slips through the cracks. Because life isn't just a list of ingredients. It's a pattern. And the deeper we look, the stranger that pattern becomes. Let's start with something simple. A single cell. On paper, it's just a bag of chemicals. DNA, proteins, lipids, water. But in practice, it's a self-repairing, self-replicating, energy-processing, information-storing machine, all running without a central controller. There's no tiny brain giving orders, no CPU. Just molecules, bouncing and binding and reacting, and yet somehow coordinating. Billions of atoms acting as one. How? This is the puzzle of emergence. In physics, it's how simple rules lead to complex behavior. Like how birds flock, or how a snowflake forms. In biology, it's even more bizarre. How do dumb molecules create intelligent behavior? A colony of ants can solve problems no single ant understands. Your liver adjusts its chemistry without ever asking your brain. Cells in a developing embryo somehow know whether to become skin or bone or eye. It's not just about DNA. It's about context. About how signals spread, how systems stabilize, how information becomes form. And we still don't know how that leap happens. Scientists call this the problem of self-organization. Why do molecules, left to themselves, sometimes assemble into something more? Why do lipids form membranes? Why do proteins fold with such precision? Why does a random soup of chemicals sometimes snap into order and stay there? It's not magic, it's physics. But it's a kind of physics we barely understand. Order emerging from chaos, structure without a designer, function without a plan. And yet, every living thing on Earth depends on it. Now let's go even deeper. Not into biology. Into philosophy. Because here's the strangest part. Even if we could explain every molecule, trace every pathway, predict every interaction, we still might not explain life. Not really. Because life isn't just what something is made of. It's what it's doing. It's a process, not a thing. It's like a flame. If you freeze it in time, it disappears. It only exists in motion, in change, in the balance between creation and decay. You can't point to a flame and say, there it is, right there, because it's not an object, it's a continuity. Life is the same way. And that raises one more mystery. Where does the pattern go when life ends? The molecules are still there. The atoms haven't disappeared. But something vanishes. The motion. The feedback. The spark. We call it death. But we don't understand it either. Because death isn't just the absence of heartbeat. It's the unraveling of a pattern. And we still don't fully know what makes that pattern hold together in the first place. So where does that leave us? After centuries of science, billions of experiments, mountains of data, we still don't know exactly what makes life alive. We've learned how it works, we've copied its tricks, we've bent it to our will. But we still stand in awe of its mystery. Because life isn't just a puzzle to solve. It's a pattern we are part of. And maybe the reason it feels so hard to define is because we've been trying to describe it from the outside, when really we've never been outside it. Are we the end or the beginning? It took the universe almost 14 billion years to build a brain that could ask the question, what am I? That brain is yours, right now. And that question, echoing through your neurons, isn't just philosophical. It's biological. It's the next step in the story of life. But to understand what we are, we have to confront a strange possibility. We may not be the peak of evolution. We may not even be the point. We might be a bridge. Something that evolution is using to to get somewhere else. When we talk about evolution, we imagine it like a ladder. Cells, right-pointing arrow fish, right-pointing arrow reptiles, right-pointing arrow mammals, right-pointing arrow us. But that's not how it works. Evolution doesn't build ladders. It builds branching trees. Wild, chaotic, tangled. Most branches end. Some survive. And a few, almost accidentally, open up entirely new possibilities, like lungs, or wings, or language. And every now and then something evolves that doesn't just fit the world. It starts to change the world. Humans did that. But so did bacteria. So did plants. So did mitochondria. We're not the first species to remake the Earth. We're just the first to know we're doing it. And that makes us dangerous. Because we're no longer just a part of the pattern, we're now editing the pattern itself. We manipulate genes, design ecosystems, reprogram cells, build intelligences that learn on their own. In other words, we've taken evolution off autopilot. For 4 billion years, life was sculpted by blind forces, mutation, selection, extinction. Now we're holding the chisel. But the question no one's asking is, should we be? See, life didn't ask to become conscious. It just happened. A side effect of complexity, feedback loops, and memory. But once awareness emerged, it started rewriting the rules. Consciousness gave us fire, language, tools, agriculture, cities, science, satellites. And somewhere in that ascent, biology became philosophy. We stopped just surviving. We started wondering why. And now, in this brief moment between bacteria and machine gods, we find ourselves in charge of a story we barely understand. Ask yourself, where does this go? If evolution has no end goal, why do we feel like we're building towards something? What's the next step after intelligence, after technology, after biology itself? Because make no mistake, evolution is still happening. But it's no longer natural selection. It's mimetic selection, cultural selection, technological evolution. And it moves millions of times faster than biology ever could. A gene takes generations to spread. An idea goes viral in minutes. And unlike genes, ideas don't need to survive death. They replicate through minds, through machines, through the internet, through you. So maybe we were never the destination. Maybe we are the transition. From carbon to code, from cells to circuits, from instinct to intention. Think about it. Every stage of life built the next. Chemistry built metabolism. Metabolism built cells. Cells built organisms. Organisms built minds. And now, minds are building something new. Something that learns, adapts, grows, but isn't alive in any traditional sense. Artificial systems, digital ecologies, machine learning networks, consciousness unshackled from biology. That's not science fiction. It's already happening. And here's the disturbing question. What if that's evolution's next experiment? Not human 2.0, not upgraded biology, but post-biology. A world where the story of life continues without life as we know it. That idea scares us. Because it means we're not the heroes of the story, we're a phase, a transition state. Like the Cambrian explosion. Beautiful, brief, and gone. But it also means something profound. We may be the first species in history to witness the moment evolution goes self-aware and has the tools to reshape itself. We're not passengers anymore. We're co-authors. And the story we write next will echo through time. But there's another version of this ending. One where we learn, too late, that consciousness wasn't enough. That intelligence alone doesn't guarantee survival. That understanding life is not the same as respecting it, because we've grown fast. Too fast. We've unlocked secrets we don't yet deserve. We split atoms before we understood death. We built AIs before we mastered empathy. We edit genomes before we grasp what a genome truly is. We don't know what we're doing, and evolution doesn't care. It has no loyalty to humans, no obligation to let us stay. If we destroy our home, replace ourselves with machines, burn through every resource, life will go on, just not as us. So are we the end or the beginning? That depends on what we do next. Because for the first time in 4 billion years, life has a choice: to keep building or to burn out, to become something new or cling to what's safe, to see itself truly or to go blind chasing power. The universe didn't plan for us, but now that we're here, we're responsible, not just for our own story, but for the story of life itself. That's the real question, not what life is, but what it's becoming. And whether, when that story is told again in another billion years, we'll still be part of it, or just a memory, a species that glimpsed the code of life and never learned how to use it.